So here we are, once again, listening to a portion of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he advises that his followers should, when they engage in their different spiritual disciplines, like prayer or giving of alms or fasting, that they should do so in privacy and in secrecy and not put on a big show, which is obviously the perfect reading to have on a night when we all put big black crosses on our foreheads. But actually, come to think of it, thanks to COVID, this just might be the year that we actually get it right and follow Jesus' instructions, or at least get close. I mean, most of you that are watching this are doing so from the privacy of your own homes, and unless we had some particularly eager go-getters who mixed up and applied their ashes this morning, there's only a few hours left in the day. So just as long as we don't go posting a whole bunch of selfies on Facebook and Instagram, I think we got a pretty good shot. Who am I kidding? If we don't post to the gram, did it even really happen? In a lot of ways, this is an odd Ash Wednesday. It's the first one that we've ever live streamed. It's the first time that we've ever done preemptive ash distribution. It's the first time that you all will be the ones with a goopy ash on your fingers and fully understand why Pastor Laura and I wear all black for this service. I mean, yeah, it's liturgically appropriate, but it's also just practical. It's also a weird Ash Wednesday because it doesn't feel like it should be time for it to be Lent again. More so than the usual, Lent really snuck up on us this year. It sort of feels like we never really finished last year's Lent. We are now less than 1 month away from March 15th, which will be the 1-year mark since the last time that we were able to gather as a community inside the walls of this sanctuary. In the past year, we have had to give up far more than we ever could have imagined. We have grieved loss of almost every variety. It has been this strange and difficult mix of burden and blessing, an exercise in our ability to look for joy and hope in the midst of difficult and fearful times. And if you're anything like me, there have been days when you succeeded, days when you were able to find those COVID blessings, days when you could see light and hope in the world around you. And then there were days that weren't quite as good. Days when you struggled to be positive or optimistic, when you had trouble finding things to be joyful for or thankful about, days when it felt like the darkness was complete and impenetrable by light of any kind. I say all of this not to depress or discourage you, but to acknowledge that we are each arriving at this sacred night from very different places, looking at the expanse of the 40-day Lenten journey with vastly different emotions and fears, hopes, and burdens. So as we enter into this holy journey through the wilderness of Lent, I invite you to first take stock of where you are, where you've been, and what you hope might come from this pilgrimage. I'm beginning this Lenten season by moving into a new apartment. Tomorrow, actually. Picked up the keys yesterday, and the plan is to move all of my stuff over the next 2 days. We'll see how that goes. One of the things that will not be coming with me to my new place is my cable subscription, which sadly means that I have to say goodbye to my DVR. So I've been working my way through all of the shows that I have recorded but haven't gotten around to watching, and one of those shows is The Great Christmas Light Fight. Each episode features 4 families from all across the country and their Christmas displays. And yes, I'm aware that it's February, but as we've said before, time doesn't mean anything in COVID, so I'm watching Christmas shows and feeling awesome about it. The displays differ drastically, depending on what type of property they own. Some sprawl across many acres of land, while others are crammed into a single residential plot. They also differ in terms of content. Some focus mainly on lights and synchronized displays with music, while other features have blow mold figures or cartoon cutouts or animatronics. All of these contestants have been cultivating their collections and developing their displays for decades, some spanning multiple generations even. And their reasons for their decorations are quite inspiring and pure. Not a single family says that their goal is to have the biggest and best display or to win Christmas or even to win the Christmas Light Fight prize. And I'm sure, there's going to be a little bit of that, but it is not the driving force. There's a family in New York that has large sections of their display dedicated to Hanukkah and Kwanzaa because they want their whole community to be able to participate in the celebration and the festivity. One man in Kentucky does it for his husband who has COPD and is wheelchair bound, to provide him an escape from the pain that he experiences on a daily basis. Others do it to honor lost loved ones who lived for the Christmas season. And all of them speak of their desire to spread joy and share a bit of happiness, to inspire awe and wonder and to brighten the lives of all who come to see their display. What is important to these families is the purpose that inspired their displays, not how these displays perform on this holiday competition show. And this Christmas lesson has applications to our own Lenten journey. Jesus' teachings in the reading for tonight are all about the importance of purpose over and against performance. So much of what Lent has come to be about in recent history is focused on that performative factor. We make this big display about what we are giving up for Lent, loudly lamenting for all to hear whatever it is that we can't have. And if we slip up, if we fall short, then all is lost and might as well just give in and try again next year. But for Jesus, that is not at all the point that he is trying to make. He is so much more interested and invested in the purpose with which we engage in our spiritual disciplines, not how well we are able to perform or how perfectly we are able to follow through. And the purpose for all of what he names is to grow closer in relationship with God. We aren't called to pray or give alms or fast in the hopes of showing off for everyone to see what amazingly faithful Christians we are. Rather, we should practice these spiritual disciplines because we are driven by a desire to broaden and strengthen our faith, because we want to develop a more profound understanding of what it is that God has called us to do with our lives, and so that we can cultivate a deeper and more secure relationship with our Creator. I think that is so important for us to remember, especially after the year that we have had. We have been forced to give up so many things that bring joy and happiness. Time spent with our loved ones, hugging our family and friends, travel, gathering in community, eating at restaurants, the list goes on and on. So rather than give up one more thing, like chocolate or caffeine, that might be one of the few remaining sources of comfort and joy that we have left right now, maybe we make this Lent about its true purpose, growing closer to God. The practices that Jesus mentions in this reading are wonderful ways to accomplish that goal, and there are many others, more so than the ones that he talks about specifically. And to that list, I would like to humbly add one more for your consideration: the practice of lament. Lament is a form of prayer that is found throughout the Old Testament, but has become lost as a tradition in many churches today. 1/3 of all of the Psalms can be considered to be laments, and laments can be found in other books as well, most obviously in Lamentations. But they can also take on many different forms. To start with, just like any form of prayer, laments can be voiced either by a single individual or by a community as a whole. There are penitential laments where we confess individual and communal sin and ask that God intervene and cleanse and restore. There are laments of despair where they cry out in pain at the present situation. And there are laments of protest where they both question and accuse God of inaction and demand that God do something to make things right. Probably one of the most famous laments is Psalm 22, which begins with, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The lament is a powerful form of prayer that can be a little uncomfortable for some people because it asks us to speak to God in ways that we might not be used to. It gives us permission. Actually, it sort of requires us to get angry with God. And that is a topic that I have found many people struggle with. Famed Old Testament theologian Walter Brueggemann theorizes that part of why the practice of lament has all but disappeared from modern faith practices is because they are, quote, too raw, candid, and abrasive for nice Christians. When I worked as a hospital chaplain for a summer in seminary, I encountered many people who felt so much anger towards God, and they didn't know what to do with it. People who didn't want to talk to me for fear of what they might say about or to God. People who had lost their faith because that was an easier option than struggling with the anger and disappointment and frustration that they felt towards God. I felt like a good portion of my job was reassuring people that they were allowed to be angry with God, that God is big enough to handle it, that I, as a pastor in training, wouldn't judge them, that I myself got angry with God and didn't always know what to do with it. Theologian Rob Mathia wrote in a recent edition of the Christian Century magazine, "Lament is an act of faith, not faithlessness. You don't lament to God if you do not believe that God is there. You don't demand that God do something unless you believe that God can indeed act." Ironically, in being given permission to yell at God and question God and shake fists at God, many feel closer to God and inspired to live more fully into God's vision for shalom. There has been much over the past year for us to lament. Pain, loss, grief, things that we have not had control over, things that we have not fully understood, things that we wish were different. Those are powerful emotions, far too powerful to be bottled up inside. They need somewhere to go, and God is big enough to handle them all. So this Lent, I would invite you to experiment with lament. Give voice to your confessions, to your sorrowful lamentations, to your fierce protests, your urgent need for God's intervention. Because the thing about laments is that while they always start from a place of despair, a place of hardship and strife, they never end there. Psalm 22 begins in verse 1 with the author accusing and lamenting that God has forsaken them. And by the time it gets to verse 22, it has moved into words of praise and thanksgiving. "I will tell of your name to my brothers and sisters. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you." Because lament is more than just a cathartic release of emotion. It is engaging in and strengthening our relationship with God, a God whom we know hears our cries, a God that we know loves us and offers grace and mercy and abundance. And while that transition to hope does not always happen on our preferred timeline or in accordance with our desired schedule of events, that's just one more thing we get to lament and protest about to God. That is the kind of trusting and engaging and emotionally committed relationship that God wants with us. And that is the true purpose of Lent. Amen.